Welcome to the Military Transition Academy's PM Pathfinder series, where Max Rogers, former enlisted Marine turned naval officer and civilian energy industry project manager extraordinaire, teams up with the former Navy enlisted and Army officer candidate Eric Doc Wright, Vesta PM's founder and best-selling author, alongside Jeremy Burdick, a retired Air Force chief, aircraft mechanic and aviator turned civilian operations chief and process specialist for Vesta PM and the PDU University, bring you an audio-video suite to help you find the path while mentoring you in the profession of project management. Along the way, you can study for your CAPM, PMP, PMI-ACP, Scrum Master certifications, or just maintain your professional development units in a casual, enjoyable conversation between friends.
All right, back for another episode of the PM Pathfinder with Max, and today we're really going to cover mostly agile and adaptive stuff. So we're going to talk about some artifacts that are used in adaptive projects. We're going to distinguish between some components of different methodologies, including Scrum, extreme programming, scaled, adaptive framework, or SAFe as you might know it, Kanban, and then we'll interpret success criteria for adaptive project management, and then prioritizing tasks in adaptive project management. All right, that's the main topics. So we can get started with some artifacts. So in my mind, one of the ones that just jumps out is a product backlog. But where do you go to as, when you start thinking about artifacts?
Well, I spent some time thinking about this, and I tried to put some order to it as you would go through the project. So, my first artifact would be the project vision statement. That's something that the product owner and the customer needs to put together to clearly get everybody on board, the whole team, and you need to post that in a prominent place in your team workspace so you can constantly stay focused on what the product vision is, and you don't stray from that. And then that feeds directly into the next artifact, which is the project charter. And you need to make sure that that charter is signed by the sponsor, so that everyone knows that you are legit in your efforts and your authority to get a project started and running. And once again, you need to have I don't know that it's necessary to post the project charter on a information radiator, but you need to have it available for everybody in case people start straying off, things like that. Then the next is exactly what you just said, the product backlog, because that's what we got to do. That's what we got to get done. And you need to create that. And following along right behind that is the product roadmap. The product roadmap is basically just a visualized roadmap, of the product backlog. And this is what we're going to create and how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. And then the next on my list was the stakeholder identification matrix, and I call it a matrix because it's more than just a stakeholder list. You need to do a little analysis and figure out, once you develop the list of stakeholders, make sure you understand and the team understands what their influence of each one of these stakeholders is and what their impact can be on the project. And then you also need to have your communication preference, on that matrix of how do you communicate with these stakeholders? How often are you communicating with them? Is it face-to-face? Do you just send them an email? All those things should be on what I call your stakeholder identification matrix. And then I listed here team ground rules and agreements. And that is something that definitely needs to be posted in your team workspace, so that every day your team members are reminded of, hey, this is what we agreed to at the beginning of this project, and how we agreed to conduct ourselves and treat each other, and all these ground rules and agreements made between the project team. It becomes an artifact, and the purpose, I guess I should state right up front, the purpose of these artifacts is to go into an archive, so that the project people coming after you don't have to reinvent the wheel or they can look at this and realize, oh, I forgot my stakeholder identification matrix, or it falls under the OPAs as far as organizational processes and that are available to use. Let's see. Then after that, I went to the iteration plan. Each time you go through an iteration during the iteration planning session, you're going to generate, the iteration backlog. You're going to generate the definition of done, and then you put that together, and that becomes your plan of what you're going to do during that next week to 2 week period. And then also you can include your user story cards, because once again, it becomes an archive document or set of cards that your fellow office mates who do a project later on may benefit them in some way, but it also forms a trail that you can go back and track. Hey, why did we do this? And you have all these story cards, and the acceptance criteria is written on the back of each story card. So it's a great set of things to have. And then also, as you go through the iteration and you do the work and produce the product, then you're going to do a product demo. And you may, for the customer or the product owner, you may have to produce some documentation that goes along to support your demonstration that you're doing. So you should definitely keep that as an artifact. The next I have, the issue log. As you're going through the project, issues are going to come up, or risk evolve into issues. A risk is something you need to keep an eye on. An issue is something you got to deal with. So keep that, and it becomes a great artifact in that other teams later on can come back and say, hey, what happened and how did they deal with it, and how successful were they at dealing with it? So it becomes a very valuable document to your organization. And then while you're doing the iteration, all those burn down, burn up charts, all those things that you produce, you need to keep them. And if you're of the mindset of, hey, agile, we reduce paperwork, or we're doing our burn down charts and burn up charts on a whiteboard, that's okay. Take a photograph of it. Take your phone, take a picture, and download the photo to the project to an archives folder in the in your project file. And just because you're creating artifacts and storing them doesn't mean it's all paper. Okay. I mean, that's what we traditionally think about, but it can be a video. It can be, a photograph. It can be whatever. It's just a way to store in the information and put it in some kind of logical file system or something that future project teams can come and avail themselves of it. And then two last things I have here. Any information radiator that you produce and hang up in the project team workspace or any prominent space like that. Once again, if it's information on an easel or take a photograph of it and put it in your archives, but it's important to record that stuff and not just, especially if you're writing things on a whiteboard and then erasing it at the end of the day so you can write more stuff the next day. Every day, at the end of the day, your last thing you do is you're leaving your workspace, take a photo of that whiteboard or those whiteboards and store it, download it to your project file so that you've got that, and you can go back and find things that you may lost or have question about later on. And then the last thing I have on my list here is something we talk about, as you go through executing an agile project, you may accumulate technical debt. And that is an issue that the team decides we're not going to deal with right now, but sooner or later we got to deal with it before the end of the project. Well, you need to document that some way and keep that in an archive, mainly so that at the very end of the last retrospective you do, you pull up that technical debt register and say, look, how did we do this? Was putting this one thing off for 3 iterations and then solving it, was that the best thing to do? Because you're looking for continuous improvement, and maybe we could have put it off for 1 iteration and maybe 2, but we really should have done this before the 5th iteration. And so it's a learning process, and all focused on continuous improvement. So
Yeah, wow.
that's the list of the artifacts that I think, which are maybe different titles and sound differently, but they're not that different from a traditional project. The traditional project is methodology is going to have your scope management plan, your budget management plan, and all these formalized plans. And they sound different, they may look different, but it's the similar or same information. That's once you break it down to the information level, it's the same stuff. And it's the stuff you want to keep and that you want to be able to provide to future project teams. And so it works out pretty much the same, whether you're doing an agile project or a predictive project.
Yeah, I couldn't help but notice that as you were describing, some of the different plans, like you didn't necessarily call them a plan. You called it, a charter, or you could call some of the team agreement, the ground rule, a team charter, right? So it's one of those items. Also, you talked about like the information radiator, and ultimately that's all the work displayed up on a board. And I dig that. I think that's one of the big key agile things is displaying your work so stakeholders can see it like real time.
Mm-hmm.
You could do that on a web page. It doesn't have to be on a board. I mean, you could do it on a lot of different ways. And I like that you brought digitalization into it, because I think the trend really is your file plans are no longer big metal hunks that have these little collated paper. It's a little drive. So,
right. We don't have big file cabinets anymore.
right.
I mean, if you walk into an office and they're full, all the offices are full of file cabinets, they haven't fully embraced the digital age yet. It's unnecessary. And
Right.
So it's
and I think starting off with kind of the way you brought it out, if you went small to big, or beginning to end, I love that you started with the vision, right? The product vision. That vision statement is really close to a scope statement. It's, what are we here for? Why are we waking up in the morning and coming to this project? What are we trying to create? And then we break it down. Well, how do we break it down? Through user stories. So I like, and then you package up those user stories. Which ones are we going to do now? Which ones are we going to do later? You might call that your release plan. And then from there, you're building your backlog. And in your backlog, you turn that into a sprint backlog, or, whatever the methodology that you're working. And then you start to complete it. And you brought up definition of done, essentially, like, what are my acceptance criteria? Definition of done's on the backside of that criteria. So I know exactly what you call done. I call done too. You probably should have 2 sets of eyes on that one. And then, brought up what do we do when we do a demo? It's a retrospective if you're doing the Scrum framework, and there's a lot of documentation that's going to come after that. So a lot of times they'll call it just retrospective documentation. It's lessons learned. It's all the stakeholder comments. Guess what? You update that stakeholder engagement assessment matrix, the SEAM, which you'd call. Essentially, each one of those things is, I tied this comment to this stakeholder. They said, hey, I don't like that feature. Great. You write that down. Don't not capture that.
Exactly.
Important. So really comprehensive list you had, Max. I think I don't have anything really to add. I just try to throw in some other ways they may call them, but ultimately you hit the burn down, you hit the burn up, you hit, you even package it. How much are we doing? That's a velocity chart, so all those little things that Max just said may have different names, but that's what you're doing. Those are the artifacts. So well done.
And I think that to roll it all up into one package, if your team produces something, you need to archive it. Okay. Yeah. If it's not a deliverable, doesn't matter. Put it in the project file, because someday you or someone else may benefit from being able to go back to that. I mean, I call it shields. It's a great shield whenever you an issue comes up and you get the team together and you agree on what to do it. and then you take off and you're executing and it's more difficult or things change. And sooner or later, someone asks, hey, now, why are we doing this? Hey, well, you flip back, you pull up the artifact and say, look, remember 3 weeks ago, we had this meeting on Tuesday at 10 o'clock, and we all agreed that first of all, we all confessed that none of us knew exactly what we were confident what the answer was, but we sat around, discussed it, and we had a consensus built that this is what the approach that we were going to take. So that's what now 3 weeks later, we found out that's not a good approach. Okay. So now we have to reassemble, we got to rethink this, and we got to come up with a better idea of doing it. But it's not that we just run off on a tangent. We had a plan, or we had an agreement on what we were going to do. So
yeah, I agree.
So archive that stuff, keep it. And it's, trust me, it will be beneficial to you as you go through your project management career. Whether or not you're designated a project manager in a traditional type methodology, or you're a coach or a practitioner or whatever your title is, the bottom line is, if you're responsible for getting the product built or the project executed, you're gonna learn as you go through the process, and taking these learnings and putting them in some kind of a system that you, other than just up in between your ears and your gray matter, that may or may not function as well as you want it to. If you have it set up somewhere where you can go back and find it and you can recall it. And that's why, once again, I'm a big proponent of coming up with an archiving system or a project filing system. Makes no difference which one you use or how you just be consistent with it, so that as you go through your career, you can refine it and improve it. And you always should be looking for methods to improve it. But if every time you do a project, you have a different file system, a different way of doing things, then good luck going back trying to find things. Whereas in the digital world, if they're all set up, your file system is all set up consistently, you can just use the search feature and from a database, and boom, it's all pops right there for you, and you just got everything else filtered away from it. So take advantage of that technology.
Yeah, and the chances of you repeating the same methodologies or similar projects is very high probability that you're going to do something similar to where you can actually help yourself. So you're going to create your own shortcuts. There's not a million different projects in the world. There's probably thousands of different ones done millions of different ways. So it's like, it's just one of those things like, hey, I could probably reuse this artifact or this template. So you're really going to help yourself when you do that. So I agree, Max. I think that's really good. And we start talking about some of the different methodologies like Scrum, Extreme Program, Skilled, Adaptive Framework, and then Kanban. And then anything else you want to throw in there is, how do you distinguish between some of those different methodologies?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the similarities. Okay. And an agile methodology, it's based on iterations, doing iterations. Okay. And in that iteration, you start off, one of the first things you do is an iteration planning session. And you may call it different things, but you got to plan what you're going to do. The iteration may be 2 weeks, it may be 4 weeks. It's whatever the context of your project or the organization you work in, what works. Then, the next thing is daily stand-up meetings. You're going to have those no matter what you call them. If you're in Scrum, you call it a Scrum. If you're in XP, it's just a daily stand-up meeting. But whatever, it's the same thing, but you just got a different terminology. And then once you go through the iteration and do your daily meetings, then you're going to produce a product, the product of that iteration, and then you're going to have to deliver that to the customer. And you typically, especially in a software development arena, you're going to do a product demo and sit down, and no matter what you call it, product review, product demo, delivery to the customer, whatever, it's the same thing. And then lastly, once you've done all that, then you want to have a reflection period, whether you call it a retrospective, call it a lessons learned conference, call it an after action review, whatever you want to call it. It's a reflection of where you sit down and the team gets together and talk about, okay, what worked, what didn't work, and what can we do better next time, and so that we do it better. Now, to differentiate between them, like I said, and then the other thing, you need to look at the roles associated with each methodology. In agile methodology generalized, you have the customer or the customer representative, which is typically known as the product owner. And then you've got the coach, who is the person who's focused on executing the project within the methodology that was chosen, and is focused on removing impediments to the team so that they can be effective and efficient in what they're doing. And then you have the people doing the work, whether or not you call them developers, whether or not you call them programmers, whether they're testers, trackers, whatever their title is. They're the working people that actually produce the product. So they're in every methodology you use. Now, to go into the specifics, Scrum, Scrum, their iteration, they call them sprints. And then at each beginning of each sprint, you have a sprint planning session. Then you have daily stand-ups they call scrums. And then you have a product review and a retrospective. In the XP world, it's more a basic agile methodology. You still have an iteration, and you have a planning session, and then you do your daily stand-up meetings and product delivery, or you turn it over to the customer, and then you do a retrospective. Now, the thing about XP though, it's focused on fast production of IT and software development stuff, and they use some unique features. They have our approaches. Paired programming is the big thing, where two programmers set together, typically a senior programmer and a junior programmer, because it's a learning experience, which is also a major focus of XP type methodology, is the whole learning aspect associated with it. And the goal being to get more efficient. The young guys and gals get trained up and they get better. The more experienced and older guys and gals learn something from the new kids who just showed up, who maybe they just took a new course, or maybe they're right out of college and they're teaching them something in college that is a new technique to use. So it's still the same methodology, but then you got some additional role names. In XP, you got the coach, and instead of developers, they're programmers. And you still have the customer rep, the product owner, but you have testers and you have trackers also. And the tracker is unique to XP in that they track the progress of the project and report on it, as well as they track the testing and make sure that testing is effective and efficient and it works, and they report on that. So as you can see now, and then Kanban still uses iterations and planning and retrospectives and product delivery and all stuff. But the thing that is unique to Kanban is, number one, their focus is on continuous improvement and limiting work in progress. Those are the two big things that are the focus of Kanban, along with the Kanban board. And that board that's where you have your daily stand-up. You're standing in front of the board. You're looking at what hasn't been started yet, what's underway, what's in testing, and what's been completed. And you stand up, and that's where you do your daily stand-up, and in front of that Kanban board. So, like I said, when you get to an organization, the company that you work in, they may have some hybrid system. There is a Scrumban, which is a methodology that someone has put together, where they take some of the aspects or terminology of Scrum and they use a Kanban board, so as a information radiator. And so you put the two together. And once again, that is one of the wonderful aspects of Agile is say, it's a methodology, it's a mindset. It's not a description of how you run a project. Okay. You run the project and set the project up, what works for you and what works for your company. Now, here are the guidelines and the principles and the values of Agile. And the people who are the coaches and the Scrum masters and the Agile practitioners, it's their job to make sure that everyone stays focused on the Agile methodology with regards to values and principles. But other than that, if you've got a tool or a technique that works in your company with your team for your industry, then hey, as long as you're not violating the tenets, the principles and the values of Agile, you can be an Agile methodology. It's an Agile methodology. So
I can't agree more. I think you did a bang up job there, and ultimately, trying to identify which one you're in. So if you're taking the exam, trying to hit those keywords that Max said, like if there's a time box and it's 1 to 4 week sprints, you probably are like, whoa, that's probably Scrum, right? Because it's a prescriptive framework, although lightweight. There's a few rules you can't violate.
And exactly, Jeremy, and that's a great point. And look, when you're sitting in the exam environment, look for what it's not. If you see an Agile iteration and it's going for 4 weeks, it's not XP. Okay, because XP is fast. It's 1 week iterations. Boom, hit it hard, turn it out, turn it over, get feedback, hit it again. And so it's not that. If it's 2 weeks, it may be Scrum, it may just be general Agile, whatever. But if you go and you look at the time frame, the time boxing that you mentioned, that Scrum lays out, that those time boxes for those ceremonies, which are the sprint planning, 3.5 hours based on a 30-day iteration. If you're doing 2 weeks instead of 4 weeks, then that planning session should be an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. Same way with the 15-minute stand-up stays the same. It's the same way with your product review. If it's a 30-day iteration, plan on 4 hours to do that. If it's a 2 week, it should be 2 hours. It's adjustable.
Yeah, so scalable for sure, scalable and extrapolable. Like you minimize the sprint, you should minimize all the ceremonies, and it should just kind of flow. And ultimately, like you said, I think it's knowing where you're not will help you know where you are, right?
Exactly.
You start to see, like you said, I love extreme programming. You start to see long sprints in that. It's not extreme.
Exactly. So forget about, and so don't be looking for a tracker. Don't be looking for a tester as far as people with roles and responsibilities. It's not going to be there. Start looking for a coach or a Scrum master or a product owner. Those are the roles, and the developers are as far as the roles. If the question is asking you about what roles are in this type of methodology, well, forget about XP. It's not XP. So you're not going to have a tracker. You're not going to have a tester.
Right. No programmer, So
exactly.
It'll be a Scrum team,
Right. Well, it's going to be, you're going to have a developer that they're cross-functional and then generalized specialists. So the guy you're going to have, on a Scrum methodology, you're going to have same guys can write the code, they can test it, they can do it all, they can track it, they can do all, and they're just called developers. So,
right. Yeah, self-organizing, cross-functional. I mean,
exactly.
That's one of you better be able to do everybody's job in Scrum. So, in Extreme, another big thing that jumped out at me is like test-driven development.
Yep.
So, ultimately you write the test and then develop to pass the test. That's kind of, that's synonymous with XP. Some other stuff when we talk about scaled or safe, you think large rollout of the Scrum framework across multiple work centers, across multiple Scrum teams, and they work at different ways to align corporate value through the rapid release of multiple Scrum iterations. So that might help you when you hear about SAFe. It's scaled, like think large scale.
Exactly. And they have a specific term that they use when you have multiple teams working on a single product or single project to provide coordination between, because every team's going to have each role. They're each going to have a practitioner or a coach or a scrum master, but to bring them all together, they have this term in PMI called Scrum of Scrums. And that's the coordination technique that you use between when you have multiple teams up at this much large scaled or scaled to a larger extent methodology, scale this out. But there's still a way of keeping control of it and keeping it coordinated.
Yeah, I agree. And then I guess lastly, Kanban, you said it, WIP, which is, work in progress, that you're trying to limit that.
Yep.
We talk about pushing and pulling. It's more about a pull-based system. You're pulling in work as you have capacity, rather than a manager pushing in work and saying, you'll have it done between this date range and this date range. It's the individual's ability to pull that work in upon individual capacity within a time box period. So got 4 weeks, and get these 4 things done, right? And you pull them. You want to do 3 on week 1? Fine. That's up to you. It's more about limiting all the work in progress, but then having a very visual process where you can see it move along the board. And whether it's, 3 columns or 4 columns, I mean, you can get this to be larger, but ultimately Kanban should be simplistic in the sense of, what do we have to do? And you said this, Max, what do we do? What do we got doing in the backlog? What are we doing? And what is done, essentially. So those 3 main columns, and then you can add a few as you need. And like you said, Scrumban, there's lots of different amalgamations or hybrid versions of all of these, to where, what they do is they just take the bits and parts that work for that organization and that project, and they start to feed them in. I know lots of companies that run the Scrumban, and I think I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a fairly popular one that I've seen in several organizations.
And then just to further that, in the testing environment, that when you're taking your PMP or your ACP exam, either one, if the question or the scenario talks about the team members being able to determine the status of the project or what's left to be done and they use the term at a glance, that's a dead giveaway. It's a Kanban board, because that's the information radiator that you can look at a glance and see by, what's not started, what's started, and what's finished, and boom, got it. And you can do it just as you're walking past on the way to coffee mess.
Yeah. So, I love that. That's great. That's great. And so it's important to be able to know, to orient yourself, when you're any test that you ever take, it's like, okay, let me figure out, what is the question really asking? And then what is it not? And then start to dive into what it is. And that'll just really help you determine, one, what the answer is, but then you're just orienting yourself. What are they trying to ask me? Is this predictive? Is this agile? Is this what flavor of agile? And those keywords, like you said, at a glance, or Scrum Master, or Scrum Team, or, tracker, those little innuendos or essential elements of information will help you answer it correctly.
And they're clues. That's why they put them in there. When they pick those terms and those verbiages, intentionally, to give you, that's the clue to which answer they're looking for you to pick. So
that's right. Yeah. Review the answers too, right? Just
exactly.
Always a good test taker technique. Review the answers. What are the options available as well?
Exactly.
Yeah. Now as we talked about some of the artifacts, and then we've got the different methodologies and some of the components of it. How do we interpret the success criteria of adaptive project management?
Well, once again, I think that is going to be determined by your organization, but the Scrum method or the Agile methodology always says, progress is measured by working software. So as long as it depends on what your project is and what your product is, but as you're progressing and you're producing a product that the customer likes or takes and can use, the key is it adds value to the customer. That's the test answer. What are you seeing? What's the purpose? What's the point? What's the measure of success? Adding value to the customer. And no matter what you think is this is great, I like this. If the customer doesn't value it, it doesn't add value to the customer. So value to the customer is the test answer for what's the measure of success.
Yeah, I can't agree more.
Yep.
I think if you had one thing to say, delivering value, what does that mean? Usually it means, like you said, the customer or the product owner is happy and you've met the objective of whatever you were trying to produce, whether it was an iteration, whether it was a sprint, whether it was just a user story that you brought into the definition of done and you completed it. Did that little piece of thing create some value to get mission accomplished? So, I love that. What about hitting your iteration goals?
Well, with the nice thing in the Agile methodology is those goals and those tasks that are broken down into individual tasks, and those are determined and selected by the team itself during the iteration planning session, where you decide this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is the definition of done. And because we're targeted toward the acceptance criteria, and our ultimate goal is to deliver something of value to our customer at the end of this iteration. So, like I said, it's these tasks or these goals are determined by the team, and therefore they take ownership of it and they take responsibility for it. And it's a shared responsibility with the team. It's not an individual is tasked to do this and another individual is tasked to do that. The team lives and dies together. And so you got to approach it from that standpoint. The same way with prioritization of which task and the plan is. All that is gone over and discussed, and a consensus is developed during that iteration planning session. And you come out at the end, whether it's a 2-hour session or a 4-hour session or whatever the length of the session is, the team walks away with a shared understanding of what we're going to do. And this is what the definition of done is. And then everybody stay focused on during this iteration, whether it's a week for XP or 30 days for Scrum, whatever it is, these are the items we're going to focus on. And because we have adopted and adapted Agile methodology, we're going to be conscientious and we're going to do our share. And as we complete a task, we're going to go get another task. And everything is up there on the product backlog or on the iteration backlog. And if there's a task remaining on the iteration backlog, it's not time to sit down and prop your feet up and take a break. You need to serve the rest of your team by you going, if you're finished with the task that you're doing, go get the next one. And when all the tasks are done, completed, then it's time to sit down and take a break.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's like burn down chart, read 0.
Yep, exactly. When you get there, that's time to take a break.
There you go. And like you said, you put it all that, you know how many tasks, story points, cards that you need to do from onset of planning. When you've completed all those and all of them met the definition of done, and they were all accepted by the stakeholder or customer or product owner, now that's a successful moment, right?
Okay.
Move on, go to the next one. What about adaptability? And we talk about responsiveness. I think that's another big one where you get to respond to those changes. And you said it, like you said it when you were talking about responding and prioritizing. Ultimately, if there's a change, that's one of the big tenets of Agile is like, hey, we embrace change even to the 11th hour.
Exactly.
That's
And once again, you keep focus on delivering value to your customer. If your customer says, hey, something has changed in my world, and I no longer, even though we've been working toward and I've been driving you toward this for weeks now, something in my world has changed, and that is no longer of value to me. But I got this new thing that is now valuable to me, and I need you to produce it or to refine it or to explain it or something. But this is what I value today. And the point, you'll see when they list characteristics of an agile methodology team member, one of the characteristics that they always talk about is maturity. You have to be mature, and you're, from a professional standpoint, that, and not take it personal. If something you've been giving your heart and soul to for 3 weeks, all of a sudden the customer goes, hey, that's of no value to me, I want you to do something else. You don't take it personal. He's the customer, or she is the customer, and your role is to deliver value and satisfy the customer. So, hey, if he wants you to roll over and do something different, you roll over and do something different, and take pride and in the knowledge that you are able to be adaptive to your customers' needs and provide the value that they're looking for.
Yeah, like C number one, produce value.
Exactly. Keeps coming back to that.
Right. And alignment with project goals, because the goals may change. It's a moving stick. The business world changes rapidly, especially in this generation and generations to come. It's just going to get faster and faster, because first to market, first movers, that's a real thing, right? That creates, you just look even at the personal music player, right? We went from a Sony Walkman that was a tape to, CDs, then to physical memory. And then now we don't even need those because it's just part of your phone, right? So it's the breakneck speed. If you don't change and adapt with it, you got a bunch of Microsoft Zooms out there that are on a shelf that'll never sell. It's just one of those things of adaptability and an alignment with value. And then I love that you brought up team dynamics. They have to be mature, and they have to know enough about everybody else's job that they're a player. What comes to mind for me is the military special ops teams, right? You send out 6, 7 people on a team, they can all do each other's jobs. And if one falls, they're still mission effective, where, that may not happen in a traditional, infantry setting or something like that.
Exactly. And I think personally, special operations forces are the military's pinnacle of agile planning. And they meet all the criteria. They don't have, 5-year plans of how we're going to go, find the bad guys. Okay. They're constantly looking, searching, and then they find the bad guys. And hey, guys, you got a week to spool up this plan, get your equipment together, decide how are you going to execute this. And they do, and they're adaptable. And like you said, it's a plug and play. They can take one guy, and it's been that way. My whole experience with the military back in the 1970s, Marine reconnaissance units, they were 6-man teams, but each team member had a dual role. If you were the communications guy, the comm guy, humping the radio and the batteries and all that stuff, you were also the backup doc and corpsman. And typically radio operators got sent to a quick corpsman course so that you knew how to start an IV and dump a bag of saline into someone if they were, going into shock from losing blood. And you can do that. And the sniper, a guy, was also maybe the backup machine gunner. And but everybody had dual roles. Everybody knew what each other's roles are. And I think that's probably the greatest tenet of success of special forces teams, is not only do they know each other's job and what they're doing, they work so closely together and they spend so much time together. They know what the other guy is thinking. They know what he's able to see and I can't see, and I'm anticipating how he's going to react based on because I know what he's going to do, and then I can react accordingly. And that comes from hours and months and years of training together and being together, and it's a mental bond that's formed between the team members.
Yeah, and it's not that unlike an agile team. The more they're together, the more they'll be a cohesive team, and you'll see the velocity start to increase because they'll become more efficient. They'll have to communicate less to get the same information across. It's actually a really neat thing to watch as an agile team comes together and becomes a unit. You can throw a lot more complexity at them with a lot less explanation, and they'll just knock it out the park. I've seen it happen.
Yep, they just soak it up. Yeah, it's just like a sponge. So
it's pretty wild. And then we begin to talk about prioritizing the tasks. Like what's some really good methodologies or ways or task tips that we can prioritize adaptive project management?
Well, I think the point to focus on is that the team determines in an agile environment, the team determines what the priority of the task. And so you have to, if you're the coach or the agile practitioner and you come from a background of traditional type project management, I think it's important you have to step back a little bit and not over assert yourself and realize that, hey, I'm in a different environment now. I'm using a different type of methodology instead of me directing the team. Okay, you guys, you did a great job. You knocked it out of the park. Now you need to take this and go do the same thing with it. Let the team function. Let them determine, okay, of course, that's also part of once I keep coming back to, because I think it's one of the most important ceremonies is the iteration planning session. During that planning session, the task and the things that are going to be developed during that iteration are going to be selected and discussed. And the priorities are going to be established also based on what we know today. Now, day 6 into the iteration, the priorities may have to change because something that you get a piece of information that you didn't have 6 days ago, but now you've got it, you've processed it, you've analyzed it and go, hey, we need to we're on item 3, working our way down the list. We need to pull 6 up and do it next because of the new information we've got. And once again, that's the whole thing. That's agile are us, is that we adapt to change. And whether it comes at the end of the iteration, the end of the project, whatever, we accept the fact we expect things to change. And instead of being concerned about it and being, defensive about it and resistant to change, just, hey, accept it and go on. And we're going to do, we've done 1, 2, and 3, and I planned on doing 4, but now we need to do 6. So I'm going to do 6 and then I'll do 4 and 5. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you said something that's really kind of important in there is by time you get to day 6, let's talk about by time you get past that first retro and you deliver something that's completely not what the customer or the product owner or the stakeholders say, hey, that didn't really look the way I'm thinking. You now did not produce value, right? So value-based prioritization is another way that you can say, okay, let's relook at this. What's the best return on my investment per task? I think that's a really good way. And we talked about that a little bit. So it's a bit of a repeat, but from the position of when you're starting to stack the backlog, what are the things that are going to produce value the quickest? I think is probably one of the number one things. And then, and you actually said it a little bit too, is with the urgency. We may have to get something done a little bit quicker. There may be time sensitivity requirements in there. And there may be risk issues, like something has to be done to mitigate a high impact risk. And then there could be some dependencies in there. So, you can't frame a house until you've poured the concrete. You can't pour the concrete unless you've done a site survey. I know that's very predictive, but there's coding things too. There was a really good, I can't remember his name now, but it was on Oopsla. And the guy gave a really good example of building a doghouse with programming. Like you can do it with popsicle sticks. You can build a whole doghouse. Now try to go build the Notre Dame Cathedral with popsicle sticks. It won't work. You can get bigger and bigger popsicle sticks, but eventually the weight of the ones on top will crush the tensile strength of the wood popsicle sticks. So you have to refactor things. You have to build it, the basement large enough to hold a 10-story house. It's the same thing with programming code. So this is not just construction. This is programming code has to be robust enough at the base layer if you're going to keep latching new features onto it. So that's another thing to consider when you're starting to like look for, how do I prioritize?
Exactly.
Yeah. Man, we covered a lot. Anything that you want to add to it as we start to wrap it up, because we've been after it for a little bit?
I just like to say, I just completed my ACP exam, and the thing that I took away from it is exactly what Doc talks about embracing the mindset. Agile is all about delivering value to the customer and accepting change. But it's important, everything that you do in an agile methodology is based on the 4 values and the 12 principles of agile methodology. And so it's so important that for you to learn, you need to have the 4 values memorized, and that you can spill them off at any time, anywhere. And you need to be so familiar with the 12 principles that you recognize when you're given 4 options about what's the correct answer, that you can pick which is the one that applies to a principle of agile. The same way you can use the same approach to developing a mindset if you're doing a predictive project. You enter into it knowing that you're going to do all the planning up front. And in order to make that planning successful, you're going to have to make assumptions, because there's so much information you don't know. So you need to document those assumptions, develop your plans, and then as you're going through your project, when one of your assumptions is invalidated or proven to be wrong or changes, you've got to know that you've got to go back and change that plan that you use that assumption in. So it's all, but it's I think that's the thing that Doc points out all the time about the mindset. You've got to develop the proper mindset based on your values and principles and the tools and techniques you have available to you, and they all build up into and within your mindset. And I understand most people, or probably everyone watching this podcast, they're preparing to take the PMP exam. And it's important that you adapt and adopt the PMI mindset of PMP and what that means, and that you understand that, and that you can just sit around and basically philosophize about how projects what methodologies, whether it's predictive, adaptive, or hybrid, or what it is. And that's the key to success as far as successfully passing PMI's exams, regardless of what they are, whether it's the PMP, the ACP, any of their exams. It's all, you have to embrace and get yourself into the PMI mindset.
Right. Yeah. And to include the certified associate project manager.
Exactly. All of them, all of their credentials. You've got to become a walking, talking PMI evangelist.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's great that you brought that up with the Agile Manifesto. I don't know that you necessarily have to have it memorized for the CAPM. You probably shouldn't be, understand it for the PMP, at least the implications of it, but you definitely need to have it memorized, I think, for the ACP. I think you're 100%, and we've got a few minutes, here's kind of the manifesto, is how, at least how it goes. We're uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value. And it starts off with this, like, okay, on the left is more than the right, but the right doesn't mean it's not valuable. It just means it's less valuable. So like individual and interactions over processes and tools. So don't get hung up on, hey, I've got to map out the entire process before I ever talk to an individual. Don't worry so much about the tools. Go talk to somebody, go interact with them, go find out what is it they value, because that tool may not extract that information. Working software over comprehensive documentation. So what does that really mean? You're producing something of value rather than sitting there and documenting for, hey, we take 30 days to document this PM plan. Well, we could have wrote a code in 2 weeks and been done and handed it to them before we ever got our PM plan done.
Right.
Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Building relationships with the person you're serving rather than letting lawyers spend 3 months on how this contract's going to be penned, and we're going to redline it, and then we're going to go back and approve it, and then we're going to look at it again. And we could have already just said, hey, 1 page, whatever we produce is yours, for you, it's yours, you own it. We'll work our best and let the lawyers work on the contract in the back. Let's get started. And I can't remember what that is. Help me out, Max, if you remember. There's a contract thing where it's scope of work. I think if they sign that, you can get started.
Right. Our statement of work.
Statement of work. That's it. So you can get started and you get going rather than, hey, let's negotiate this contract. And then responding to change over following a plan. The plan's great until it, first contact with the enemy. What if you got to change? Then make the change, right? Make the change that produces value, right? So there's value on the items on the right, but we just value the left more.
Right. And one of the largest projects I managed, we had spent months and months trying to I was working for a subsea installation contractor, and we were trying to get a contract in place to do work for one of the super major oil companies. And we had spent weeks and going into months spinning our wheels with all and the contract was several hundred pages thick. But we realized we were wasting our time. So we didn't realize we were using agile methodologies. But what we wound up doing is we signed an agreement that said my company, as the installation contractor, would show up with our equipment, which was ships and subsea installation equipment, and personnel that knew how to operate that equipment and do subsea construction. And the customer would provide supervisory personnel that would direct us in what to do. And basically, we would do what they told us to do, and they paid us a day rate. And one of the biggest obstacles I had to overcome is that the guys that worked for me, who were experienced subsea installers, they knew how to do things much more efficiently than what the customer's representatives did. And they got frustrated by being told to do something that was less efficient than they knew how to do it. And I had to spend a lot of time with them saying, hey, guys, look, we're a different situation. When we're doing a firm fixed price contract, yes, we need to execute it as efficiently as possible because we're getting paid a fixed price. We're not in that kind of contract. We're being paid now a day rate contract, and our requirement is we're supposed to do what our customer tells us to do or ask us to do. And I literally had the language put in the contract that said, we will do whatever we are tasked to do as long as it is not illegal, immoral, or impossible. And that was basically the contract language. We went to work and we agreed to a day rate on the vessel and the number of personnel and went to work. And instead of having a 200-page contract that described and explained all the details, we had it in less than a paragraph. And it was a $55 million contract.
Yeah.
project. So
That's the manifesto in a great story. I mean, great example of, getting the working software, get to work.
hmm?
Customer collaboration instead of contract negotiation. I mean, I love it. I think what a great story to bring it home.
Well, I'll tell you, when I first started, I first was introduced to agile methodologies, and I read the Agile Manifesto because I come from years and years of a contracts background, and I'm reading that we value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. I go, man, that's a recipe for failure. But what I failed to understand was that within the mindset of agile methodology, what that is saying is we value relationships with our customers over this piece of paper that our contract specialists and attorneys are going to spend months developing. That's not the point. The point is we need to deliver value to our customer and make sure that our customer is satisfied. That's the mindset. And you focus on doing that, and don't worry about, show me where in the contract where I'm supposed to do this. It's like, hey, if you're being paid by the day to do something, do what you're told to do. And the only thing I had to do was with my guys was that make sure that when you're given direction by the owner's representative, that it is in writing, that it's an email, that it's or in your tally book that you're carrying around in your coveralls. Pull it out and write, hey, time, date, this person told me to do this, and have them put their initials by your tally book entry. And something, because sooner or later, when someone asks, why in the world did you do that? Because your guy told me to do it. That's why I did it.
That's right. Yeah. Always yourself in that manner. I think that's obviously very smart. Nothing illegal, nothing immoral, nothing unsafe, and nothing impossible.
Yep. Exactly. And we'll do, other than that, we'll do anything you want us to ask us to do.
That's right.
So,
I love it. Well, thanks again, Max, for being on the show. I think this was a great one. I mean, we hit a lot of different things between artifacts, different components of different frameworks. We hit the criteria of success, and then, how to prioritize. So, and then obviously the bonus was the Agile Manifesto. There we go.
There you go. And like I said, focus on the mindset. But thanks for having me. I always enjoy it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the PM Pathfinder series and want to join the profession, certify, or maintain your PDUs by visiting vets2pm.com and looking up Project Manager Essential Toolbox or a bootcamp.